Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News, and today we have a wonderful guest with me. He's none other than Pastor David Knapp. He is the president for the Grief Relief Ministries in the United States, and he's also preparing a new book that's going to be released soon, and he's going to share with us his wonderful book, which I have just recently previewed. Uh, Pastor David, welcome to my show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes. So, Pastor David, could you tell us more about Grief Relief Ministries?
Grief Relief Ministries has been established to help those who are literally aiding people who are going through grief. I find oftentimes as I've gone through the process myself that there are various ministries out there to help those who are actually grieving, but very few to answer the question for those who are helping them. I didn't know what to say. How do I help someone who's grieving? And so Grief Relief Ministries is actually designed to aid those who are assisting grievers.
Now, is grieving pose a health threat to anyone who has lost their loved ones? Uh, is there any cases that has actually occur any like a suicide even?
There's I can document individuals. I know a gentleman I just actually met through a grieving small group this last week, who after his mother died, and then within 80 days his wife died suddenly in his arms, and he actually went into such depression that he went into seclusion for 3 days, didn't eat. Finally, a friend came by, and he wound up in the hospital. Actually, they put him in a mental part of it for a while until he recovered. So there's not only examples like that that I know of, but it is scientifically documented that the stress of relief of grief lowers your immune system, making you much more susceptible to disease and high risk for anything that revolves around stress.
Now, you have written this wonderful book that's in progress right now, and
Correct.
that talks about your life story, overcoming your grief as well. It's about your loss of your two wives.
Correct.
Now, how did that happen? And I take it as you have married twice in your lifetime. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Could you tell us more about that book?
Okay, well, my book actually comes from my story, my experience, and part of that actually goes into my childhood. At age 11, my dad was killed accidentally in a farming accident, leaving me the oldest of four siblings. And so I watched my mother go through the grieving process and realized the physical challenges of that. But then as I um, went through high school, and then I had some other losses like a pet. But it was very close to me. And then into my adulthood, in addition to just lose friends moving away, along in my early 30s, my wife at the time was diagnosed with breast cancer. After 7 years of dealing with breast cancer, why she passed on. 2 years later, I remarried. I married a lady who was a widow. And the thing that is, I had four children. She had four children. They were about the same age. So yes, we blended 8 teenagers at that age, and successfully, very successfully, in fact. And then about 20 years later, which brings us to the present, about 5 years ago, when my wife Judith, second wife, began to have uh, physical issues. And long story short, last summer she was finally diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and she died 1 year ago in October.
Now, all about the book that you've written in the progress right now,
Correct.
and why do you see the need to share with everyone about this story that you just shared with me? And why is it so important today that people must know this story?
I'm finding that with life in today's world moving so fast, people are not or don't take the time to grieve. And here's actually what happened. The first, after my first wife died, I was teaching at a college, And at that time, I had still had 4 kids at home, and so much of the opportunity after my wife passed, and then I went through the grieving process. Life basically just had to keep going, and but I did remember various stages to the point that I actually created some memoirs. So I didn't want to forget what it was like, and so I did that, and I recorded my memoirs, and then just put them on the shelf. Well, then here it happens again, and this time after my wife died, I'm realizing and being given lots of opportunities. And beginning about 3 or 4 months after my second wife died, I found myself getting lots of requests. Tell us what you learned. What was it like? Was it harder the second time? And the requests just began to come in one after the other. I mean, we're talking Christian businessmen's groups, we're talking churches, small groups, hospice organizations, and asking me to come and tell. And the responses I began to get, people would line up to talk to me afterwards, particularly men lining up to talk to me and say, thank you, I'm 50 years old, I've never heard anybody talk like that before. I always wondered what could I do to have helped. And then to add to that, I had personal good friends that about 9 months later, after my wife died, I finally was able to connect with them physically. And they said, Dave, I tried many times to write you a letter. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't do anything. And I'm getting a lot of requests. Can you help us? Tell us what we could have done. And I guess the teacher inside me is compelled to do that. And so a book began to be the need of the hour. And I believe God's asked me to do this, so I'm making it happen.
Now, have you ever been questioned before to God when these things happened, especially the death of both of your wives? Uh, did it ever occur to you to for you to question God why God allow bad things happen to good people like you?
You know what?
How did you overcome that?
Okay, one of the challenges that is for every human, everybody asks the question why in some fashion or another. In my case, I'll just admit that many people ask me that question. I can't understand, you're going through this a second time, wonder why. And I'll be honest, because of my personal connection with God Himself, I trust Him so much that my why question is not really large. Um, the second time, looking back, I can document, I can see things that God did from my first wife and the experiences and how He used that. So I trust Him to do that again. That doesn't take away my pain. It doesn't make it any easier. But as far as me shaking my fist at God, I'll be honest, I really, in an emotional fashion, I don't do that but it has to do with my trust um, with Him. Even though I can't answer the why. I think someday it'll be clearer, but right now I don't know.
Now, how did you help others to go through what you have gone through? Um, and how can others learn from the lessons that you have been through so far?
One of the ways and that's why the book, the reason that I'm putting the book together is to have material. And of course, the Grief Relief Ministries is designed and is established to provide that kind of information. I've even done, like I've mentioned, I've spoken, I've done seminars, and I've even spoken to small groups. One of the things that I've done to help others is to sit down and, in a sense, ask them the question nobody asked me. And I'll sit down and talk to people who have gone through a similar experience to mine, or even other experiences, whether it be what kind of loss or whatever. And you'll find me able to ask the difficult questions. One of them is actually, tell me how your loved one died, and do that months after the event. And commonly, the tendency is for many of us is to do just the opposite. We think the farther away from the event, the less you should talk about it. But for the griever, that's not always the process. Um, Often the griever, when it just happened, they're hurting so bad that lengthy discussions may or may not be a benefit. But then as time goes on, they're working through the process, and the need to talk is greater. So I make myself available. And in fact, sometimes I'll even, if I have a family member or someone that's close to me that has experienced a loss, I will purposely put it on my calendar. Okay, at 3 months, I'm going to call them and come and have a chat with them, because oftentimes that's when many people pull away.
Mm. Now, how long does uh, one overcome their grief from the time that they've lost their loved one? Does it take about 3 months to get it over with?
Okay, the challenge I have is using the word over. Oftentimes and no offense, that's a real common approach. Technically, grief is not something you get over, it's something you work through. And a time frame is an impossibility to create. There's a lot of variables. Some of the variables have to do with how close of a relationship you had with that loved one, whether it was close or not, they were pretty distant. Has Some of it has to do with your own worldview on how you view things that happen around you. But as far as a time frame, generally, um, it's it's for different for men and women. Oftentimes, not always. Sometimes it's that way. You know, they people say don't make any major decisions for 12 months. Well, the 12-month factor, really, I've figured out, is really that's one opportunity for you to have one circle of life, and you've been able to do everything that you normally do in life one time. It's those first things. But I've known of men that are able to work through the mourning process 6 to 9 months. But commonly it takes more like 9 to 12 months. Ladies, sometimes it's like 9 to 18 months, even 2 years. And for lots of different reasons. There's research that points out that men and women, even chemically, mourn at a different situation. So some of that comes into play there. But commonly, people think, well, it's been 3 weeks since the funeral. He ought to be getting over it. Look out, he's just now starting the deep mourning process. We're talking months and sometimes a couple years.
So, what will be the at least if you don't mind, if you share just maybe one or two tips from your book for those who have experienced loss, how can they overcome it in the process?
Okay, in the process of overcoming loss, there's a number of things that can be of help. One, for example, would be um, to do things to remember and to create a memory. My first wife, I actually wrote an article. I was doing some writing for a publication company here in the States, and I wrote an article on her life and published it, and it was published. And it's like that's like a little monument. My second wife, now our family was a lot different now. This time we have the 8 children. They're married. They have grandchildren. There's 26 grandchildren now, all of whom had to go through the mourning process. And we did that succinctly as a family, one at a time, actually. So this time, one of the things I did was one of my daughters put together a heritage book with pictures of my wife and a little bit about her family and her and us and all together. And then my other daughter put together a grandma book. And it's a book with pictures of her and each one of the grandkids, one grandkid per page. And each one of the kids and grandkids got a copy of that. That process and doing that was very healing for me and for my family. Having something physical to remember. Another process is to keep in mind that the the closer to the event, oftentimes the main issue is how you feel. And the tendency is to kind of push it off. There's something wrong with me because I feel this way. No, you really hurt. The pain is there. It's shock to your system, your emotions, your mental, your physical is in shock. And you need to uh, allow for that to be there. And then as time goes on, then you can work on other issues such as physically learning how to get out socially, getting used to not wearing a wedding ring. Those kind of things can develop over time, and then you just let them develop. And sometimes even something physical like cleaning out the closet for your spouse's clothes. Um, my first wife, we knew she was going to die really soon, and she actually, her and her sister actually worked through that, so I didn't have that pain. But my first wife, I didn't do that for like 6 months. I left the clothes in there until I was ready to just begin little by little letting it go. And the other thing just to keep in mind is, for those listening, for someone who's lost a spouse, just think of all the love lost songs that you hear. That's the pain that this person is going through of a lost lover, not just the physical loss of a companion, but the relationship has died. And that is part of the mourning process that often is ignored. And the last one I just mentioned here in passing is the issue of loneliness. Many, many times I have observed that one of the things that keeps people in the mourning process, in the grieving process, particularly when it's a spouse, is not being able to deal with the loneliness. The loneliness seems to drag them down and keep them in that situation. And so coming up with mindsets and things to deal with the loneliness can be a big help in getting release.
There's another question that's commonly asked here in Southeast Asia, especially. They say that that is coming from a viewer, and that is I have a some friends that their wives or their husbands have died, but particularly for men, if if their wife dies, it seems that they found that the husbands will also follow suit soon after that, within 1 to 2 years. How can we prevent this from happening? How can husbands uh, uh, will not face the to, the toward the detour to unhealthy lifestyle. Somehow there's a pattern to it that
Yes.
when the wife dies, the husband dies after that within 1 or 2 years. It seems like a
Right.
connection. There's a connection to it.
Yes.
Could you resolve that?
Well, I don't know that I can completely resolve it, but it's true. Even in America, I heard stats that after a spouse dies, that there's a 40% chance that the second one would die within 2 years. And I can understand some of that. There's several reasons. One is the way, like I mentioned, it's the way men process grief is different than women. Women tend to release. Men either mourn or go with men either replace or go internal. And oftentimes it's realizing that what they're going through is something that needs to be addressed health wise. I the whole story is after my first wife died, and then we went through the stress of blending children, blending 8 teenagers, and all that kind of stuff. You add to that a family history of heart disease. Um, yeah, about 8 years ago, I had open heart surgery, and as the doctor went through all the issues that could have caused it, the only thing he could reduce it down to is family history and stress, because none of the other classic ones I participated in. And so what I did this time is knowing that, okay, I says, all right, no, I know from pre-4 that my tendency is to take stress and internalize it, and that affects my health negatively. So actually went to my cardiologist 1 week after my wife's funeral and had a meeting with the two main cardiologists in the office. And I says, you guys, here I am again. I don't want to find myself in a couple of years back in for heart surgery because of the internalizing of stress. What do you recommend I do to physically to work on this? And one of the things they said is activity. They says, well, if you're not walking or not doing any regular activity, because that helps relieve stress. And just knowing that and doing things uh, purposely to either with diet and with exercise to realize that this is not just an emotional thing I'm going through. This is a physical thing that can kill me. And I knew that, I realized that. And so I consciously, intentionally did things to do that. Now, the other thing, of course, again, too, is um, it's sometimes hard for men to even identify their own feelings. And if men could um, be aggressive in reaching out and just having somebody to talk to, and that's where relatives of men who have lost their spouse, if they keep that in mind, without being really mean, ask that man who, uncle, dad, grandpa, ask them to talk about it. Ask them questions. I call it priming the pump. In other words, getting them to release what they're feeling. And it's because oftentimes the thing that kills men is keeping it in. And my challenge is it's not a weakness, it's a physical condition that can be treated.
And what is your three keys to success in overcoming your grief in your personal experience?
Okay, believe it or not, and it's not a coined term. My number one ability to overcome grief revolves around my worldview. And my worldview revolves around the God of creation, the God of the Bible. And based on my personal relationship with Jesus and my connection with his comforter, the Holy Spirit, I found myself able to go through the process without breaking. I could go through the process with clarity. Pain, yes, it didn't take the pain away. I still, from the day my wife was diagnosed and they said she will die from this, I sat down and I sobbed for a half hour and I did that every day, sometimes 3 times a day till Christmas. But that doesn't mean that that didn't happen. But when it came to the ability to, in a sense, see above the hurt that I was in, it started with my relationship with Jesus Christ and my walk with God. That's paramount. Number two, it has to do with the support group around me. My family and the folks, my friends and people of the church that I attend, our family actually were just attracted, drawn together like a beehive. We just and actually supported each other in amazing ways. Someday I'll have to record all that. It was just a thrill of what we're able to do that. And then the third thing actually was experience. And it's not just my experience. It was the experience of myself, but also experience by talking to others who have been through the process. And I had several people that were close that had experience with grieving in the process, and I listened to them.
Amazing. Now, a lot of my viewers are asking this question to themselves, and they like to pose this question right now to you. And this question is coming from Indonesia, and that is, how do you overcome fear when you know that your loved one is going to die? And when it comes, how do you handle it? Because a lot of people have this notion that fear is uncontrollable. So
Fear,
how did you control fear?
okay, fear is paralyzing. I agree. And fear would turn my stomach in knots at times. Quite frankly, the opposite of fear is faith. It's a matter of trust. Some of it is trusting the individual that's dying. Some of it's trusting yourself that that you do have the inner strength to do this. And of course, like I mentioned, trusting in God. Um, I found the when fear overtook me, I usually have one of the first things I found helpful is to identify it, realize that's what I'm experiencing right this minute is fear. I'm afraid of what's happening. I'm afraid of what's going to happen. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me. I'm afraid of, I don't want my wife to go through this. And the fear is paralyzing sometimes. But the release of that fear usually is it won't happen automatically. It is a choice. Dealing with fear is a choice, and I find the opposite is faith. And so my faith in what I know, my faith in what's true, and many times I would just have to sit there when the fear was mounting. I had to go back to what is true. Well, here's what's true. I love my wife. She knows I love her, and and so our relationship is solid. And I would just go through the basics of what is going on, and I know my wife is right with God, and I know where my belief has her in a very secure place when this is over, and I can believe. And I would just literally rehearse basic facts of life that I know to be true, because the truth overcomes darkness. Faith is a counterfeit to, a repeller of fear.
Mm. Another question I like to bring about is that if you could give some advice for those who have uh, who have some counseling background especially, and also friends who know that their loved ones have lost their spouses or their friends. What are the words they should avoid uh, when you know when they are helping those who are mourning? And I know that you are covering that issue in one of your chapters, and
Yes.
could you share some insights on that?
Okay. The insight I would give, one of the rules in what to say to someone who's lost a spouse, particularly, is the closer, the less. Meaning, the closer to the event, the less talk. For example, the day my wife died, I didn't need someone coming up to me. In fact, it was almost repulsive to me if someone were to come up to me and say, well, she's in a better place and you need to look to the future and give me all this logic about, I've got hope in the future. That helped zero. At that day, all I needed was someone to just simply just have empathy for what I was going through, and even something like, "Man, it must really hurt," or "I miss her too," and that's it. But then 3 months later, I wanted to sit down and rehearse the day that she died and what I felt like and all that stuff. And most people do just the opposite. They think they have to come and comfort them with all these words the day of the funeral or the day that person died, and then 3 weeks later they ignore them and won't talk about it anymore. The reverse is really more true. Another caution I would give to those who are aiding somebody who's going through grieving. Remember, I mentioned how that loneliness is a huge factor, oftentimes not really thought of. People think of the emotion of loss and ignore the loneliness this person's going through, which amplifies the loss. Instead of saying, okay, call me anytime you want to talk, just give me a call. Anytime, really, I mean it, give me a call. That's nice. The real thing to say, can I come by at 7 on Saturday or Sunday? You see the big difference. One, you're saying something nice to apparently appease your conscience, but that's really not going to be a help. But the other one is you care enough to give up your time to actually come and keep me company. That's going to be more valuable to me. Just a few things like that. Just one of the things to keep in mind is that oftentimes early on, the first week or so, the grieving person really is more hurting themselves than concerned about the person that has died. And oftentimes words um, like I said, it must really hurt, or may God give you the peace, or something simple like that to help that individual.
Now, you also cover one other chapter about children going through grief, and if they were to lose their mothers or their fathers, especially,
Right.
how do one help uh, or aid children who are in need?
See, I had that experience the first time my first wife died. My youngest was 11, my oldest was 16 or so, and I had 4 kids in there. And I was very deliberate about helping and making sure that they were able to grieve. And one of the ways I did that is to get them alone. not just keep them as a herd or as a group or even as a family, but find a time when I could actually grieve, share my grief with them and help them realize it's okay to cry, it's okay to miss them, and so forth. And then, of course, as time goes on, to keep that process going, to talk about that spouse and realize that just because she's not here doesn't mean we've forgotten. And in fact, we're not going to forget. Now, this time I had not only my 8 children and their spouses, but I had 26 grandkids. And we had the privilege and time, not everybody has that, of all of them coming to where I live and each one individually having goodbye time with my wife. And I participated in that. I was in the room, and I found that, like the same thing, that some of my grandkids, I noticed that they mourned the deepest and the clearest when I hugged them, when I touched them, and I cried with them. They felt my body sobbing, and so they could release. And another thing, of course, was having parents who had been through it, and so they were alert to their kids over the next several weeks. A couple of them were so distraught that they even got in trouble at school a little bit. So the parent went to the school people and said, "Hey, by the way, his grandma just died." And it helped everything out. So um, yeah, it's a key for an adult to try to monitor how that child is doing and not just leave it up to them, because in their young, confused minds, they can think all kinds of stuff, and you have to really take the time one-on-one to help talk it through, to help give them the right thinking on how to view what happened.
And and not for so unusual, you have a chapter on that about helping those who have lost a pet, jobs, and of course, most commonly and sadly in our societies around the world, even in Singapore, divorce.
Right.
Um, how how have you helped those people with those issues from pets to jobs and divorce? Because right now we're living in a very complex world
Right.
where inflation is high, more people are losing their jobs or they have fear of losing their jobs, and then they grieve over the loss of their jobs,
Right.
and also divorce as well.
Yes.
Uh, any insights on that?
Yeah, just a few, and I'm not a trained psychologist in all these areas, and the people that are in the throes of that sometimes do need that type of background. But I'll just draw from what I can tell you. First of all, let me deal with the pet issue. One of the challenges in many societies, at least, is that the friends of someone who has lost a pet, and this a pet, by the way, is a great source to overcome loneliness. And here's a true story that happened to me just a few months ago. I had spoken publicly on my loss, and in the course of my talk, I mentioned that grieving can come from various sources, and I mentioned that losing a pet, could also create the same grieving process as losing a mate, and that just kept going and told my story. When I finished, I walked down the aisle in the auditorium, and the lady sitting in the very back on the end was crying when I walked by her, and she handed me a note. And I took the note and responded, and then went on to the foyer. Well, I opened the note, and it says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I lost my best friend 3 months ago. My Doberman Pinscher died after 14 years of companionship. My friends tell me I'm silly to mourn the loss of a pet. Thank you. You gave me permission to grieve." And just that was all she needed. She just needed someone to tell her it's okay to grieve that loss, because it was indeed a severe loss. Another one is I myself found myself out of losing a job after my first wife died, and we married and moved. We had to move, and so I was actually at decisions out of my control. I lost my job and position, and we actually moved, and I started over. And my challenge with that particular issue was, again, I didn't, I failed at that time myself. My wife saw it happening, but it took me a while to really catch on to myself. I didn't identify that loss as a grievable issue. But it wasn't until I actually found realized that I was grieving for those losses. I lost my position. I lost my coworkers who were very good friends. I even had to move because of it. So I lost the community. And those losses created a hurt inside me. And it wasn't until I started literally grieving and mourning that loss that I had freedom from that. And my wife could tell my spirit was dampened, but nobody else, really knew what was going on, and even I denied that that's really what was going on. But until I identified that, created the need for grieving, that I got release. Now, the one on divorce, again, with that one comes often the emotion of guilt. There's very few divorces that I know of that somebody in the mix is not eaten up with guilt to some extent, or they've overcome their guilt with anger. And so the grieving process many times is hampered because of these emotions that need to be dealt with and brought to the surface. So I believe that, again, in the divorce issue, depending on the circumstances, whether it's slow or sudden, um, being giving yourself permission to grieve certain losses, if nothing more than a bad decision, or the relationship that you thought was there, whatever the loss. Recently, through a divorce, there was a guy who, and he remarried, but then he lost custody, so he lost his kids through the divorce. They didn't die, but it was a loss, and he happened to have the freedom to grieve that loss, and helped him heal through the process. So I think the subject are significant to at least identify as grievable issues.
Now, about your book that's coming up soon,
Yeah.
and how can individuals and publishers find out more information and even probably assist you in your grief relief ministries? Is there a website?
There is. The website for Grief Relief Ministry is just that, Grief Relief Ministries, plural.com. And on that site is more information about me, a little bit of my background, and there will be blog posts, and I'll be giving snippets similar to what you've gotten today on a regular basis. Things from the book will be posted there. There's an opportunity for you to opt in, and on a regular basis, emails will go out with tidbits from the book on a regular basis to those who come and opt in to be to follow the process of the book. And the book, the time frame for the book, we're looking at just a few months away.
Well, once again, viewers, please take note. Uh, look out for this wonderful book. And do you have a title for that?
The title of the book is, believe it or not, I Didn't Know What to Say. Subtitle, Aid to Helping Those Who Are Assisting Mourners.
And folks, there you go. Please do look out for this wonderful title, and it would be available at Amazon.com and all
Correct.
leading good bookstores soon.
Yes.
And once again, Pastor Knapp, thank you for joining us here at the National Critics' Choice. I'm Robin Steinberg. Have a good week ahead, and also keep safe.
Thank you very much. God bless.